At the most prestigious debate hall in the country, a quiet black girl stepped in her worn sneakers and old blazer, making the entire room freeze. Then laughter broke out, and a white male student pointed at her, mocking her in front of everyone. Hours later, she took the stage, looked him straight in the eye, and dismantled his entire argument with precision and force. What no one expected was that she would go from an outsider to the one rewriting the very rules of Harvard. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from. And subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The autumn wind pressed gently against her blazer as Zariah Cole walked up the brick pathway towards Sanders Hall, the oldest and most prestigious debate auditorium on Harvard's campus. Her fingers gripped the strap of her canvas backpack, the fabric frayed at the edges. She had borrowed her cousin's olive green blazer for the occasion, and her sneakers, once white, had dulled into a permanent off gray from years of use. Her natural hair was tied into a high bun, tight and neat, just the way her mother liked it. Each step she took echoed in her chest like a countdown, her heart pounding with anticipation and nerves. She tried not to look up too much as other students passed by in tight blazers, pressed pants, shiny loafers, and polished attitudes. Most walked in small, confident groups, laughing and talking about which policy models would likely come up, comparing their tournament rankings and Ivy League prep resumes. Zariah had no team to lean on, no coach by her side. It was just her and the notebook filled with handwritten speeches she and her mom had practiced at their kitchen table in the late hours after her mom's second shift. As she stepped through the wide wooden doors into the marble-floored lobby of Sanders Hall, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. The space was buzzing with voices, but the moment she entered, a perceptible pause spread across the room. Conversation's dulled eyes turned. A girl in a navy coat nudged her friend and tilted her chin subtly in Zariah's direction. A boy leaned in to whisper something behind a cupped hand, barely hiding a smirk. "Who is that?" A girl in a cream blazer whispered, nudging the boy next to her with her elbow. "No clue." "I don't think she's on the prep school circuit," he muttered back. "I bet she's from one of those public magnet programs," another voice chimed in, loud enough to be heard. "You know, free admission, low bar, high praise." A boy in wire-rimmed glasses added, "Some kind of outreach placement maybe." "Like, for exposure," someone behind her said, barely masking their laughter. "She's probably here to observe, not compete." Zariah kept her eyes forward, face blank. Her grip on the backpack strap tightened. Her stomach knotted, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of flinching. One girl snorted quietly. "What's with the shoes? Looks like she jogged here. She's not even wearing a school pin," another noted. "You think she's official?" Zariah walked slowly, carefully, like each step might crack the floor beneath her. She didn't look left or right. Her fingers pressed harder against the edge of her debate notebook. Each whispered jab cut deeper than the last. And though she had told herself over and over that she deserved to be here, that she had earned this, it was hard to believe that right now. Then came the voice. Louder, clearer, sharper. It sliced through the room like a blade dipped in sarcasm. "Well, damn. Do we take walk-ins now?" Zariah froze mid-step. The voice came from across the hall. Chase Alden IV, tall blonde and unmistakably comfortable in his own skin, stood with one hand in his pocket and the other lazily gesturing toward her. He wore a tailored crimson blazer with the Harvard insignia embroidered in gold on the chest, his polished leather shoes catching the shine of the overhead lights. His voice dripped with mockery, the kind that wore a smile but carried a knife. Seriously, he continued now, speaking to the crowd more than anyone in particular. "Is this debate nationals or a community talent night?" Laughter rippled across the lobby, not loud, but enough to sting. Zariah's breath caught in her throat. Her feet, still planted mid-stride, suddenly felt rooted to the ground. Her hand clenched tighter on her backpack strap. Her eyes darted around the room. Some students looked down awkwardly, pretending not to hear. Others watched her openly amused, curious, or indifferent. A girl standing near Chase leaned in and whispered loudly enough for Zariah to hear. She must be one of those diversity quotas. You know, representing underrepresented perspectives. Laughter erupted, this time louder. Some students tried to look away. A few looked embarrassed, but no one said anything. Zariah's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes burned not with tears, but with pressure. Like the heat in her chest was trying to climb into her throat and scream, but she wouldn't let it. She stood there frozen for a second, not because she didn't know what to say, but because everything she wanted to say would sound like begging. And she didn't beg. Not anymore. Behind her, someone chuckled. She must be one of those, what do they call it, equity access slot social merit admission, another mocked. She's probably here for the perspective. Zaria closed her eyes for half a second. She tried to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, just like she did before practice rounds back home. But the flashbacks came anyway. First grade, lunch period, sitting at the metal table in the corner with her hop and hum lunchbox battered from years of use. Other kids brought Lunchables and neat thermoses. She had rice, red beans, and chicken wrapped in foil. She remembered a boy pointing at her food nose wrinkled. "What is that? That smells weird." Someone else laughed. "Why does your lunch look poor?" And then the worst, the laughter spreading, because laughter was contagious, especially when it wasn't aimed at you. The feeling then was the same as now, like being smaller than your skin, like being on display but not in admiration, in suspicion. She opened her eyes and forced her feet to move again. The check-in desk was just ahead. Her shoulders stayed square, her spine straight. Chase wasn't finished. "I mean, hey, maybe she's got a killer underdog speech coming up," he said loud enough for everyone. "All heart, all hustle, no pedigree, makes for great press." Zaria didn't look at him, didn't look at any of them. She walked the final steps to the desk and said in a voice that didn't shake, "Zaria Cole, New Orleans Southeast Regional." The student worker looked up and blinked, caught off guard by how calm she was. Right. You're in lecture hall C. Thank you." Zaria turned and walked toward the hallway. She didn't rush, didn't speak. Behind her, Chase said just loudly enough, "Good luck, sweetheart. You're gonna need it." There was no laughter this time, only silence. That kind of silence that grows when a room knows someone's gone too far, but no one's brave enough to say it. Zaria didn't need them to say it. She knew what had just happened. She had been tested, and she wasn't finished yet. The door to the dorm room clicked shut behind her, soft and final. Zaria dropped her backpack onto the worn chair by the desk and stood for a moment in the center of the tiny space, unsure of what to do with herself. Her shoulders were still tense, her jaw still locked. The silence wrapped around her like a blanket she hadn't asked for. No voices, no eyes, no whispered judgments. She finally let out the breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hand reached instinctively for the window latch. She pushed it open just enough to let the cool evening air drift in. Outside, Harvard's campus glowed in soft amber tones, the lamps casting long shadows across the stone paths and red brick buildings. It was beautiful in that cold, distant kind of way. The kind of beauty that didn't ask if you were comfortable, only if you belonged. She didn't sit. Not yet. Her feet carried her to the mirror above the small sink, and she looked at her reflection with quiet intensity. The girl staring back wasn't trembling. She didn't cry, but her eyes were heavy, tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Her bun had come a little loose. She reached up and tightened it slowly, like she was anchoring herself again. One loop, two twists. Secure. Then she finally sat down on the edge of the bed. Her hands rested on her lap. Her fingers curled inward. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just tired. But not in the way that made you give up. In the way that made you need something to hold on to. She leaned over and opened the side pocket of her backpack. Out came the notebook, worn dog-eared, its cover soft from handling. Inside were pages upon pages of notes, arguments, rebuttals, and underlined quotes in blue ink. Every margin filled with tiny reminders, circles, arrows, stars, her handwriting and her mother's, side by side. She ran her thumb across a page they'd worked on last week, an argument about education access. Her mother had written at the top in neat cursive, "Say it clear, say it true, make them feel it." Zaria smiled just barely. She could hear her mother's voice in her head the way it always sounded late at night when the two of them sat at the kitchen table, elbows close, heads bowed over debate printouts. The apartment would be quiet except for the humming fridge and the occasional sound of footsteps in the unit above. Her mother would still be wearing her work apron from the diner, hair wrapped up in a scarf, eyes tired but focused. "I don't know how you do it," Zaria had said once, rubbing her eyes. "2 jobs and still helping me edit speeches, like you're my coach or something." Her mother didn't look up, just circled a sentence. "I do it," she said, "because no one did it for me." Zaria remembered how quiet that moment was. Then her mom glanced up, eyes steady. "And because you're worth betting everything on." Back in the dorm, Zaria swallowed hard. She could still see her mother's face in her mind. High cheekbones, deep brown eyes. skin the color of roasted coffee, always radiant under the fluorescent kitchen lights. She had the kind of voice that made you sit up straighter, not because it was loud, but because it meant something. You don't need to sound like them, her mother had told her one night after a long prep session. You don't need to dress like them, act like them, talk like them. Zariah had looked up confused. Her mom leaned in. You just need to think deeper, see clearer, speak truer. That night had stuck with her. It always did. It came back to her now in the stillness of the dorm room, with the ghosts of judgment still fresh on her skin. She could still feel Chase's eyes on her, still hear that awful voice calling her a redemption arc. But her mother's voice was louder, more real. It cut through the noise with something no one at that debate hall had offered her belief. Her gaze shifted back to the notebook in her lap. She turned to a page filled with bullet points about systemic barriers in education. She could see where her mother had underlined a line twice. The difference between access and acceptance is everything. That had been her mother's note. Zariah remembered how her mom had explained it. Plenty of places will let you in the door. That's access. But when they look at you like you're not supposed to be there, that's not acceptance. And baby girl, you deserve both. Zariah nodded to no one in particular. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. The weight on her chest felt a little lighter. She remembered the way her mother would tilt her head when something didn't make sense. Don't just memorize the argument, she'd say. Make it yours. If you don't believe it, neither will they. Zariah whispered out loud, I believe it. Then louder, firmer, I believe it. She stood up slowly, walked back over to the desk, and set the notebook down with purpose. She opened it to a fresh page, uncapped her pen, and began writing not from obligation, but from fire. She wrote a new opener. Not something fancy, something real, something hers. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind with every sentence. She paused, once hand still. Then, almost instinctively, she reached for her phone and opened the last text her mom had sent her 2 nights ago before the trip. You don't have to prove anything to them, Zari. Just prove it to yourself. And I already know the answer. She smiled at the screen. That light, that unwavering support had followed her here. Across states, across stairs, across silence. This room, this cold, unfamiliar room, felt a little more like home now. Not because it had changed, but because she had. Because her mother's voice reminded her of who she was before Chase ever opened his mouth. She was the daughter of a woman who gave everything so her child could stand in rooms like these. And no one, not a smirk, not a whisper, not 1,000 gold-lettered blazers could take that away. Outside the window, the lamps flickered on along the courtyard. The wind stirred the leaves on the path. Inside, Zariah turned one more page and started outlining her argument for tomorrow's round. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real. And that would be enough, because the voice that mattered most had already told her she belonged here, and she was going to make them feel it. The morning of the first elimination round arrived with a gray sky and a cold wind that bit through Zariah's blazer as she walked across the courtyard. Leaves scraped against the stone path beneath her shoes, their dry rustle echoing in the early quiet. She held her notebook tight against her chest, fingers curled around it like it might slip away if she loosened her grip. Inside the building, the energy was different now. More focused, the air buzzed with tension, ambition, and nerves. Students moved quickly between rooms, adjusting ties, checking notes, whispering last-minute statistics to each other, like athletes reviewing plays before a championship game. Zariah stood in the corner of the hallway, her back against the wall, trying to steady her breath. She watched students, most of them white, many from elite prep academies, float through the halls like they had done this 1,000 times. Their confidence wasn't loud, but it was everywhere. It lived in their posture, their smirks, the way they spoke to judges without a flicker of hesitation. She felt like an intruder again, but now the discomfort didn't sting. It sharpened. Across the room, Chase leaned against a doorway, surrounded by a familiar circle of admirers. His eyes met hers almost immediately. That same arrogant grin tugged at his mouth. "Well, well," he said loud enough for others to hear. "Did you bring that underdog speech with you today? Or are we saving that for the finale?" Zariah didn't blink. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She simply turned and walked toward the auditorium entrance. Behind her, someone chuckled, but she didn't care anymore. She had learned to live with the sound of people doubting her. What she hadn't learned to live with, what she refused to accept, was giving them a reason to be right. The students filed into Sanders Hall, each one assigned a section. Zariah took her seat in the middle rows alone, surrounded by voices that weren't speaking to her. She flipped her notebook open on her lap, eyes locked on the front of the room, where the judges and tournament organizers stood behind a long oak table. Professor Langston, the head coordinator, stepped to the podium. His presence alone was enough to quiet the room. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and glanced at the screen behind him. "Good morning," he said. "Welcome to the first round of elimination. Today's resolution is—" He clicked a remote, and the words appeared in bold lettering behind him. "Resolved. The role of socioeconomic background in university admissions should be minimized." The pause that followed felt longer than it probably was. Then, as if on cue, heads turned. Not all of them, but enough. Zariah felt it immediately. A flicker of heat spread through her chest, rising slowly into her neck. She heard a girl behind her whisper, "Wow, did they choose that just for her?" Someone else leaned in and said under their breath, "Well, she should crush this one. It's her whole life story, right?" Zariah kept her eyes forward, but her grip on her pen tightened until her knuckles turned white. She felt exposed, like the topic had reached into her chest and ripped out everything she had worked to hide behind her composure. It was personal, too personal, and they all knew it. As if her presence here wasn't already under a microscope now, they were going to debate the very reason people like her even got in the room. She glanced down at the page in front of her, the blank line where she'd meant to start her notes, but her mind was spiraling. They wanted her to fall into the trap, to turn this into a sob story, to get emotional, to fit their expectations. But she wasn't going to give them that. She didn't come here to beg for acceptance. She came to prove that she didn't need permission. By the time the lunch break arrived, she hadn't spoken a word to anyone. She slipped out of the hall and found a quiet spot in the library, far from the clusters of students reviewing files and exchanging talking points. She sat at the far end of a long oak table, surrounded by shelves older than her grandmother. She took a deep breath and pulled out her laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dim light, and she started to search. Harvard admissions reports, legacy statistics, income-based acceptance patterns. She dug through Supreme Court decisions on affirmative action, read case studies about inner-city school funding, and bookmarked a dozen articles on how standardized testing disproportionately impacts low-income students. She wasn't going to wing this. She was going to dissect it, line by line. By early evening, the table was buried in notes tabs, printouts, and scribbled outlines. Her fingers ached from typing. Her eyes stung from staring at the screen. But she wasn't tired. Not tonight, because this wasn't just a debate round anymore. This was a response to every glance, every whisper, every smirk. Chase's voice echoed faintly in her memory redemption arc. If that's what they wanted to call her, fine. But they'd regret underestimating the story she came to tell. She read over one of her paragraphs again, tightening the structure, sharpening the phrasing. Her mother's voice came to her. Don't just prove a point, prove a truth. This wasn't about playing the victim. It was about holding up a mirror, and she had the data to do it. Her phone buzzed once. A new email from the tournament committee confirming her speaking order for the next morning. She was last. Of course. She closed the notification and looked back at her notes. Good. Let them speak first. Let them underestimate her. Let them leave gaps. She'd be the one to close them. Around her, the library grew quiet as more students returned to their dorms. Zariah stayed. She revised. She recited. She built her case like a house brick by brick, reinforced at every corner. The anger she felt earlier hadn't gone away, but now it had a purpose. And if they were going to make her fight for a seat at the table, she was going to bring the whole table down with her logic. Because the best revenge wasn't a raised voice. It was a flawless argument. And when she stood up to speak tomorrow, she wouldn't need to shout. She would speak with the kind of clarity that made even the smuggest listener stop and listen, because being underestimated wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon, and she was ready to use it. The sound of her name being called felt distant, like it had traveled underwater to reach her. Next speaker, Zariah Cole, representing New Orleans Southeast Regional. Zariah blinked once, then closed her notebook and rose from her seat in the back row. Her heart wasn't pounding, at least not in the panicked way it used to. It thudded slow and steady, like a warning drum inside her chest. She adjusted the collar of her second-hand blazer, walked past the rows of eyes, and made her way down the center aisle. As she moved through the auditorium, the weight of every stare pressed into her skin. They weren't subtle anymore. Some looked curious, some skeptical. Others looked annoyed, like she was about to waste their time. She didn't care. She didn't look at them. The stage was small but raised, just high enough to make you feel separated from everyone else. The wooden podium stood dead center, a single microphone clipped at the top. Zariah climbed the few steps with Purpose notebook in one hand, the other brushing against her thigh as she steadied her breathing. She stood behind the podium and looked out at the audience. Rows of students, faculty, judges, a few cameras stationed at the back. And somewhere in the far corner, Chase's arms crossed jaw tight, like he had already decided she didn't belong there. Her fingers lightly touched the mic. She leaned in close enough to be heard, but not enough to flinch. "I'd like to start," she said, her voice calm, "by thanking Harvard for this invitation." She paused, then added evenly, "Even if some people in this room believe I shouldn't be here." A beat of silence. Then something subtle shifted. A few people stirred in their chairs. Others sat still. Zariah didn't pause to check their reactions. She opened her notebook to the first page and spoke clearly, like she had rehearsed 1,000 times, but with a difference. This time the words didn't feel memorized. They felt necessary. The resolution today asks us whether we should minimize the role of socioeconomic background in university admissions. She looked up. Her eyes moved across the judges, then across the students. For some of us, that question isn't academic. It's not hypothetical. It's real. She turned a page. There are students who come from legacies who grow up knowing their parents' or grandparents' names are etched on campus walls. They know the interviewers. They understand the process before they're even old enough to apply. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. And then there are students like me. Now the room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that happens when no one is paying attention, but the kind that falls when people are hearing something they weren't ready for. "I didn't have consultants or prep courses," she continued. "I didn't grow up visiting campuses. I didn't even know what early action meant until junior year. But I had books from the library. I had questions. I had a mother who told me I could compete with anyone, even if I didn't have what they had." She flipped to the next page of her notes. She gave them numbers, now real data. In the last admission cycle, students from families in the top 10% of income were more than 4 times as likely to be accepted into elite universities as those from the bottom 10%. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. She shifted her stance slightly, letting her words settle. When we talk about minimizing the role of income, what we're really doing is pretending that income hasn't already shaped every part of the process before a student even fills out an application. No one moved. No one whispered. Zariah didn't smile. She didn't soften. She spoke like a surgeon, making clean, deliberate cuts through the argument. "I come from a public high school in a district where half the students share textbooks and where college counselors have caseloads so high they can barely remember your name. I studied for the SAT between shifts at the diner where my mother works. My debate team couldn't afford to fly to nationals. I had to raise the money myself. But I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for recognition." She let that sit. Then she closed her notebook. She didn't need the rest. Not for this part. She looked straight at the audience. Some of us were born with a seat at the table. Then her eyes found Chase in the crowd. His expression was neutral, but his jaw was tight. Zariah didn't look away. And some of us had to knock on every door, break down every wall, and fight just to be allowed in the room. The silence after that was full, not empty, not awkward, just full. A tension that wrapped around every person in the auditorium. She inhaled slowly, then finished. "So before we talk about minimizing socioeconomic background in admissions, maybe we should talk about how much it's already been ignored." Then in a voice steady as stone, she said, "If we want merit to matter, then we have to be honest about how we measure it." She stepped back from the podium. No applause, not yet, not even a murmur, just stillness. And for the first time since she arrived, it wasn't because people were judging her. It was because they were listening, truly listening. Zariah walked down the steps slowly and returned to her seat. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath was calm. She sat upright, eyes forward, notebook closed. She didn't need to know what anyone was saying. She had said enough. And in that silence, she had finally been heard. The applause came soft at first, like hesitant rain tapping on a window. Then it grew, rippling across the auditorium, as if everyone had just realized what they had heard. Zariah didn't look around. She didn't need to. She sat perfectly still in her chair, eyes forward, hands resting on her notebook. Inside her chest, a steady fire burned. Not one of anger, but of clarity. She had done what she came to do. And judging by the silence that preceded the applause, she had made them listen. Chase stood in the corridor outside the auditorium, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight it ached. From behind the tall glass windows, he could still hear the applause, fading, scattered but real. For Zariah. For her. He hadn't expected the room to respond like that, not to her. He told himself it was just timing, just a fluke of the topic. A sympathy round. That's what it had to be. And yet, something didn't sit right. He had seen the judges' faces during her speech. They were leaning in, listening. One of them even nodded at her closing line. Nodded. That wasn't supposed to happen. And worst of all, she hadn't cracked not once. Not under the pressure. Not even when he baited her earlier that afternoon. She didn't flinch. She didn't lash out. She just delivered. He turned away from the glass, the muscles in his neck tense. His friends trailed behind him, offering half-hearted encouragement, weak jokes. He wasn't hearing them. He was already thinking ahead. If she had that much composure now, if she could win a crowd on her own terms, she was a real threat. He had underestimated her. That wouldn't happen again. He pulled out his phone and checked the tournament schedule. The next round was in less than 24 hours. Not enough time for anyone to prepare a new argument from scratch. Unless they thought they had to. Unless they believed the topic had changed. A thought slid into his mind, quiet but sharp. Later that afternoon, in the lounge area outside the main hall, students milled about, some reviewing notes, others sipping from paper coffee cups or huddling in quiet conversation. Zariah sat alone on a leather bench by the window, her laptop open, refining points for the next round. The sunlight caught the side of her face, but she didn't notice. She was too focused. Chase approached with calculated steps, flanked by two members of his debate circle. He carried a water bottle in one hand, the cap spinning loosely between his fingers. His smile was casual. Too casual. "You got a lucky round," he said, stopping just a few feet in front of her. Zariah looked up, expression neutral. "Excuse me, that resolution," he said, shrugging. "I mean, come on. It was basically designed for you." She didn't answer. He kept going. "It's easy to shine when the topic hands you a sympathy card." His voice was calm, but underneath it there was something sharper, a tremble of frustration trying to hide behind charm. Zariah stared at him for a moment, then returned to her laptop. "I guess we'll see how easy it is tomorrow," she said quietly. Chase's smile faltered just a hair. "Sure," he replied, nodding once. "Just don't let the pressure get to you. Some people crack under it." He turned and walked away without waiting for a response. Zariah watched him disappear down the hallway, then let out a slow breath. She could feel it. Something in his tone, his posture. It wasn't confidence anymore. It was calculation. He wasn't just playing the game. He was trying to change the rules. That night, as the tournament organizers finalized the brackets for round 2, Chase sat alone in his dorm room. His phone buzzed with a message from one of the judges. Standard confirmation. He barely glanced at it. His attention was on his laptop. He clicked open a blank browser window, opened a second email tab, and began typing. Subject line revised, round 2. Topic urgent sender debate.committee@harvadmin.com. The address looked official. Almost. The domain was a shade off. Enough to fool someone glancing quickly, especially someone exhausted, distracted, and under pressure. He copied the tournament logo from the real site, pasted in standard committee language, added a line about last-minute adjustments due to bracket changes, then inserted a new topic, resolved. The American education system rewards conformity over creativity. He read it twice, then once more. Satisfied, he hit send to skol.debate@gmail.com. No hesitation. Then he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. He didn't smile, not fully, but the knot in his chest loosened just enough to let him breathe. Across campus in her dorm room, Zariah was writing when the email landed. The email came in just after 7:45 p.m., blinking quietly at the top of Zariah's screen. She had just returned from dinner, a granola bar and a banana she picked up from the campus store, her head still pounding from the intensity of round 1. She sat cross-legged on the bed, hoodie on, notebook open. The subject line made her eyes narrow. Revised, round 2. Topic urgent. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. Something about it didn't sit right. The sender's address looked official, almost identical to the previous committee emails, but the phrasing in the subject line felt off. Still, there wasn't time for suspicion. This was Harvard. This was a national tournament. Surely they wouldn't mess around with fake notices. She opened the message. Due to an internal conflict in speaker matchups, your round 2 topic has been reassigned. Please prepare the following resolution. The American education system rewards conformity over creativity. Failure to address the new prompt will result in disqualification. Her stomach tightened. She stared at the screen for a few seconds, then checked the address again. The logo matched. The signature line listed one of the committee members. It all looked legitimate, but something still gnawed at the back of her mind. She opened the tournament portal just to confirm, but the website hadn't updated anything. No mention of new assignments. No note about speaker changes. She hesitated, then shook her head. There was no time. The second round was tomorrow morning, and she couldn't afford to second-guess an official message. The stakes were too high. If this was real, and she showed up unprepared, it could end her run right then and there. She closed the tournament page and pulled out a new sheet of paper. This wasn't just another debate topic. It was a complete shift in direction. Her entire prep for the original prompt was now useless. She had to build an entirely new argument from scratch and fast. She opened Google Docs, created a new folder, and started searching. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Articles, studies, expert commentary. She scanned op-eds on standardized testing critiques of modern curriculum design, TED Talks on creativity in education. The topic wasn't unfamiliar. She had thoughts, opinions, but none of them were organized. Nothing was sharp enough to be spoken from a podium in front of judges. By 9:30, her laptop began to overheat. The fan whirred loudly. The screen glitched once, then froze. No, don't do this," she whispered, tapping the keys. The document closed itself. She tried restarting. Nothing. The screen stayed black. She slammed the lid shut and grabbed her notebook instead, flipping to a clean page. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote her name at the top. The ink smeared from her palm, but she kept going. Opening thesis. The American education system often penalizes nonconformity and prioritizes memorization over innovation. She stopped, crossed it out, rewrote it, again and again. By 10:30, her eyes burned. Her back ached from hunching over the desk. The campus had grown quiet. Most of the other students had gone to sleep, or at least retreated into their study pods to polish speeches they'd already prepared. But Zaria didn't have that luxury. She brewed a small cup of black coffee from the machine in the common room. It tasted burnt and stale, but she drank it fast. Every sip kept her upright. She laid her notes across the floor like puzzle pieces. Paragraphs, quotes, data points. One by one, she reordered them, cut them, rebuilt them. Every time the logic felt weak, she tore it apart and rewrote it again. Just before midnight, her phone buzzed with a text from her mom. "Baby, I know it's hard, but remember, don't let pressure steal your joy. You were born for this." Zaria closed her eyes for a moment. She took a deep breath and held it. Her fingers flexed and relaxed. Then she wrote faster. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about finishing what they started back home at the kitchen table, beneath the leaky ceiling, over a bowl of rice and beans, after her mom's double shift. This wasn't just her debate. It was her neighborhoods, her schools, every student who had to fight for a counselor's attention, every teen who walked into rooms like this and felt invisible. "I've come too far," she whispered to herself. "I'm not letting one email take this from me." By 1:30 in the morning, her outline was complete. She had her opening statement, 3 core arguments, 2 counter-arguments prepared with examples, and a closing that didn't beg, but challenged. Still, she wasn't satisfied. She stood in front of the mirror and rehearsed aloud, pretending the walls were lined with skeptics. She spoke slowly, carefully checking her tone. She paused at the right moments. She added emphasis where it mattered. Each time she slipped, she circled back and fixed it. She didn't stop until her voice turned hoarse. By 3, her hands were covered in blue ink. Her eyes were raw. Her shoulders shook. But she was ready. She sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the mess of notes on the floor, the dead laptop on the desk, the blinking cursor on her phone screen. This was what commitment looked like, what grit felt like. And if the tournament was trying to test her limits, they had picked the wrong girl. She didn't sleep. She just leaned back, eyes closed, letting her body rest for a few stolen minutes, her mind already preparing for the next morning. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would walk in with her head high, because even if she had to fight blind, she would still fight smart. The morning air was colder than the day before. Zaria pulled her blazer tight across her chest as she crossed the courtyard toward the auditorium. Her hands were stiff from lack of sleep, her eyes heavy from hours spent staring at paper, but her steps were steady. She had done everything she could. She had poured her energy, her fear, her fire into a speech she hadn't expected. And now, it was time. The hallway outside the debate room was buzzing with voices, some calm, others frantically flipping through pages or whispering to partners. Zariah stood by the check-in table, pulling out her ID when she saw the tournament coordinator, Professor Grant, approach with her usual clipped stride. Name Grant asked without looking up. Zariah Cole, she said, voice clear. Grant checked the list and nodded. Round 2, she said, handing over a folder. You're in room B. Zariah took the folder, then hesitated. Is the topic still the one from the email, she asked. Grant looked up slowly. What email? Zariah's breath caught. The one last night, she said, about the revised resolution. The email said there was no change. Grant said firmly, brow tightening. Topic remains as originally posted, resolved. Online activism is less effective than traditional grassroots organizing. Zariah's throat dried instantly. She looked down at the folder in her hands, then back up. There must be a mistake, she said, voice thinner now. I received an official email. It looked, if you prepared for a different topic, Grant said, eyes narrowing. You have approximately 10 minutes to adapt. Zariah stood frozen. Grant gave her one last look. Your round starts in 7. Good luck. She turned and walked away. Zariah didn't move. It was a setup. The email, the strange tone, the pressure. She had fallen for it. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She blinked twice and looked around the hallway. Across the room, Chase was leaning casually against the wall, arms crossed, talking to another competitor. He wasn't looking at her, but when her eyes met his for just a moment, he tilted his head slightly, almost like a nod. Her chest clenched. There was no doubt. He had done this, but there was no time to accuse, no room for confrontation. The judge was already calling competitors into the room. She turned and hurried to a bench at the end of the hallway. Her hands shook as she ripped a clean sheet from her notebook. She looked at the original topic again, barely able to think past the white noise in her head. Resolved online activism is less effective than traditional grassroots organizing. She stared at the words, trying to steady her breath. Minda di qua shadegukngaboy mo dongemal. She could almost hear her mother say it. You didn't come this far to fold now. She wrote the number 1, then another line, then another. 10 points, 10 ideas. They weren't perfect. They weren't elegant, but they were hers. The judge's voice called from inside the room. Miss Cole, we're ready for you. Zariah stood, slowly folded her paper in half, and walked in. The debate room was modest, 2 long tables facing forward, 3 judges seated in front, a small audience of students in the back. She took her place at the podium. Her name was called. She unfolded the sheet and set it on the surface. The room went quiet. She looked up and began. Good morning, she said, voice trembling slightly. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the committee for allowing me to be here today, and for sticking to the original topic, I guess. A few confused chuckles. She didn't smile. She looked down at her notes. Today's resolution asks us to compare 2 forms of activism, online and traditional. I could give you numbers. I could quote articles. But I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start with something personal. She gripped the podium edge tighter. 2 years ago, during the peak of the pandemic, I lost my uncle. Her voice dipped and the room shifted. People leaned in. He got sick fast. By the time we got a hospital to take him, it was too late. My mom and I couldn't afford the funeral. We didn't know what to do. She paused, then looked up, eyes clear now. And it was a Facebook post. Just a simple post. That changed everything. She kept going. A former teacher saw it. Then her friend shared it. Then someone from a local community page. In 2 days, strangers donated enough for us to give him the burial he deserved. A beat passed. Zariah inhaled. Was that traditional organizing? No. Did we knock on doors? Did we print flyers? No. It was a post. A few clicks. But it saved us. The judges said nothing. No one in the room moved. She continued. When people say online activism isn't real, they forget that real people live behind those screens. They forget that a trending hashtag can turn into funding for water in Flint, that a viral tweet can get someone wrongfully arrested out of jail, that Zoom calls and PayPal links kept food banks running when physical rallies were shut down. She flipped her page. Is online activism perfect? No. But neither is anything. Traditional movements didn't always include everyone either. But this isn't about competition. It's about recognizing that power looks different now. And if you ignore one tool because it's new, you lose the fight before it starts. Her voice strengthened. My generation organizes through group chats, live streams, fundraisers with links in bios. That doesn't make us lazy. That makes us adaptive." She paused again, then leaned forward, eyes locked on the judges. "You asked me if online activism is less effective. I ask you less effective for who?" That silence returned. Dense. Still. Someone in the back sniffled. Zariah stood tall, shoulders square. "I didn't come here to win with a perfect argument. I came here to tell the truth." She stepped back. The judges scribbled. The room was breathless. Zariah didn't look at Chase. She didn't need to, because this time the trap hadn't worked, and her voice had filled the room anyway. The hall was already packed when Zariah stepped inside. The final round was the most anticipated event of the week, and it felt like all of Harvard had shown up to watch. Students filled every seat, faculty stood in the back, and two small cameras on tripods at the corners of the room streamed the debate live to regional affiliates. The energy buzzed, half excitement, half tension. Everyone knew who the finalists were. Everyone knew it wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a showdown. Zariah's eyes scanned the crowd. Banners from different schools hung on the walls, but the room had clearly divided itself. Those who backed tradition sat clustered near Chase's side, polished and confident, while a quieter but no less determined group near the left aisle leaned forward in anticipation, waiting for Zariah to speak. She walked slowly toward the competitor's table, her notebook in one hand. Her back was straight, her face calm. But inside, her chest thudded in slow, heavy beats. Chase was already there, seated with his team. He stood as she approached. His expression was unreadable, smile, tight jaw stiff. When their eyes met, Zariah didn't look away. This time, she stared straight through him. He broke the stare first. A student coordinator walked to the podium. "Finalists, please take your seats." Zariah placed her things on the table and sat. Her hand brushed over the corner of her notebook, finding the folded paper she had tucked into the back. A note from her mom written weeks ago. "When they try to shut the door, baby, you knock louder." She didn't need to read it again. She already knew every word. The moderator took the stage. "Welcome to the final round of the Harvard National Invitational. Today's resolution: traditional institutions are the best guardians of academic integrity. Each finalist will have one opening statement followed by rebuttals and closing arguments." The room fell quiet. First speaker, Chase Alden, representing the Harvard Honor Division. Chase stood, walked to the podium, and adjusted the mic with practiced ease. "Good morning," he began, voice smooth. "Today we're debating the role of traditional institutions, universities, boards, academies, and whether they are still the gold standard in protecting academic values. I argue clearly and without hesitation that they are." He moved fluidly through his points: historical precedents, trust in established systems, the checks and balances that come with long-standing governance. He spoke of legacy, responsibility, and structure. His voice rose and fell at perfect moments, a blend of confidence and rhythm polished by years of experience. And while critics of these institutions often cite past failings, he said they forget that evolution happens within, not outside of these systems. These institutions are not perfect, but they are necessary. He ended with a smile and returned to his seat. The room offered light applause. The moderator nodded. Next speaker, Zaria Cole, representing New Orleans Southeast Regional. She stood, this time no hesitation. As she stepped to the podium, she could feel the pressure in the room shift. All eyes locked onto her. She didn't adjust the mic. She didn't shuffle her papers. She placed both hands on the podium and spoke. "Before I respond to the resolution," she said, voice steady, "I want to say something very clear." She looked straight at Chase. "A few nights ago, I received a fake email. It listed a false resolution for the second round of this tournament. I prepared an entire speech based on it through the night alone without help, and I found out it was false 5 minutes before I spoke." A ripple moved through the room. Zariah didn't blink. "I don't know who sent it, but I know why they did. Because they didn't think I'd be able to recover. Because they didn't think I'd fight through it. Because they didn't think I belonged." She looked at the judges now, and yet here I am. No one moved. She drew a breath. "Now to the topic. Do traditional institutions protect academic integrity? Let me tell you what I've seen." She flipped a page in her notebook. These same institutions once banned women from classrooms, then students of color, then low-income students. Their definitions of integrity have always come with conditions, ones that conveniently excluded people like me. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. When something is built without you in mind, how can you trust it to guard your worth? She gave them data about legacy admissions, endowments protecting status quo, the historical role of elite colleges in gatekeeping opportunity. She cited examples of professors silenced for speaking out, students punished for challenging biased scholarships withheld under arbitrary rules. Then she told them a story. In my sophomore year, our school library lost funding. The doors were locked. We had no place to study, no internet, no access. You know what we did? We organized online. Students started a campaign. We raised donations. A bookstore owner donated shelves. We reopened the library ourselves. She paused. That wasn't done by a traditional institution. That was done by students who refused to wait for permission to be seen. Her eyes scanned the room. You want to know what integrity looks like? It's not in rules written by people who never met us. It's in showing up anyway. It's in building your own chair when no one offers you a seat. The room was silent again. Chase shifted in his seat. She continued, I am not saying we burn everything down. I am saying we stop pretending that tradition automatically means truth. And we start asking who those traditions have protected and who they've pushed out. She closed her notebook. I didn't get here because a system protected me. I got here despite it. And then her voice sharpened. So if traditional institutions are the only guardians of academic integrity, then why did someone feel the need to sabotage a 17-year-old girl to win a stunned silence? Chase flinched. His fingers tapped the table once, then stopped. Zariah stepped back from the mic. There was no applause yet. The tension was too thick. Chase stood slowly for his rebuttal, but his confidence had cracked. He stumbled through his first point, fumbling with a citation, tried to reframe her words as emotional, not objective, but no one bought it. His voice wavered halfway through. Zariah watched him unmoved. When he returned to his seat, he avoided her eyes. The closing statements were brief. When the round ended, the room finally reacted, not just clapping, cheering, shouting. Zariah's name echoed through the hall as students stood from their seats. She stood still, eyes closed, taking in the noise. Not as a reward, but as proof. She had walked through every trap and still stood taller than ever. Chase sat quietly. He didn't speak. He didn't stand. Because there are moments when the truth said at the right time doesn't just win. It silences. The final announcement came like a thunderclap, not in sound, but in weight. The winner of the Harvard National Invitational Debate Championship, Zariah Cole. There was a moment of stunned silence, just a beat. And then the room erupted. Chairs scraped back as students jumped to their feet. The sound of clapping swelled like a wave crashing through the auditorium. It was no longer just applause. It was release, relief, recognition. People didn't just cheer because she won. They cheered because for once the right person did. Zariah didn't move at first. Her eyes blinked slowly as if trying to make sense of the words. Then her shoulders dropped slightly, a long, invisible weight, leaving her body all at once. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Just a breath. Then another. She closed her eyes. Let it all wash over her. Across the stage, Chase stood frozen. His hands remained by his side. He didn't argue, didn't demand a recount. He simply turned, adjusted the collar of his jacket, and walked off stage through the side exit. No goodbye, no congratulations, just silence, the same silence he had tried to force on her from the beginning. As Zariah stepped down from the podium, a man in a gray suit intercepted her. Professor Langston, the chair of the judging panel. He extended his hand but didn't let go immediately. He leaned in close and said quietly, so only she could hear, "You didn't just win. You made us rethink what fairness looks like. That's more than most professors do in a lifetime." Then he stepped back. Zariah felt her knees go weak, but she didn't fall. Someone behind her, another student from a different school, reached forward to hug her. Then another. Hands touched her shoulders. A girl from UCLA squeezed her arm and whispered, "Thank you." The roar in the auditorium still hadn't died down. Miles away, in a small apartment in New Orleans, her mother stood barefoot in the middle of their kitchen, eyes glued to the tablet on the table. The live stream had frozen for a moment after the announcement, but when it resumed, the camera showed Zariah's face smiling, now soft raw. Tears spilled down her mother's cheeks. She pressed her hand to the screen, whispering, "You did it, baby. You did it." Then she sat down slowly at the table, still crying, still smiling, gripping the phone in her lap with the other hand. She had no one to call who would understand what this truly meant, but she didn't need to explain it to anyone. Back at the auditorium, a student reporter tried to push through the crowd. A young man with a press badge lifted his camera towards Zariah and asked, "How does it feel to win?" Zariah finally spoke, her voice hoarse but steady. "It's not about the trophy. It's about being seen." Another student nearby added, "She earned every second of that." She nodded once, then glanced around the room. There were no banners with her name, no legacy behind her, no wealthy school sending flowers to her dorm, just student strangers applauding her as if she had just given them permission to believe in their own voice. Because for some people, validation isn't handed out with a handshake or printed on a certificate. It's fought for, earned, demanded, and now received. What shook the room wasn't just her skill. It was her clarity, her defiance without venom, her facts without bitterness, her truth without apology. She didn't play their game. She made them play hers. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that brilliance doesn't ask for permission. It walks through the door, whether you open it or not. And tonight, Zariah Cole didn't just walk through the door. She left it wide open. The sun was low and slow that evening, casting long shadows across the narrow street. It was one of those sticky Louisiana afternoons when everything moved just a little slower. Cicadas buzzed somewhere in the distance. A box fan hummed behind the screen door. On the porch of a weathered duplex, Zariah Cole sat cross-legged on a plastic lawn chair, a sweating glass of sweet iced tea balanced on one knee. Her white t-shirt had a faded logo from the local community center. Her hair was pulled into a high bun, and her skin glowed warm in the golden light. For once, there were no flashcards in her lap, no speech drafts, no highlighters or debate prep books scattered around her feet. Just silence. A rare, full-bodied silence that wrapped around her like a soft blanket. She hadn't heard her name called in 3 days. No interviews, no cameras, no more tournament stages. The storm had passed. From inside the house came the sound of footsteps. A door creaked, and then her mother appeared on the porch with a white envelope in her hand. She was still wearing her work shirt from the diner apron strings untied, but dangling at her sides. Her curls were a little frizzed from the heat, and her eyes held the kind of tired only single mothers understand. But she smiled as she held out the envelope. This just came. From Boston. Zariah raised an eyebrow, but didn't reach for it right away. "Boston?" she asked, her voice relaxed, lighter than it had been in months. "Mm-hmm." Her mother nodded. "Harvard. It's got your name on it." Zariah set her tea down carefully and took the envelope. Her fingers brushed the thick paper. She flipped it over and hesitated just a second before breaking the seal. Her eyes scanned the letter slowly, carefully. Then again, and then again. Her lips parted slightly, then curved. Not wide, not loud, just steady. Her mother watched her waiting, trying to read the expression, like she'd done since Zariah was a toddler. Zariah folded the letter back along its crease, pressed it to her chest, and looked up with eyes still damp but calm. "They offered me a summer scholarship, fully covered. I'll be back there in June." Her mother let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. She took a slow step forward, hands out, as if she were holding something precious she didn't want to drop. They said, Zariah read from the letter again. "We are excited to continue nurturing voices like yours. We believe in what you represent." Her mother sat down beside her, not saying a word at first. She just reached out and held Zariah's hand. The same hand she used to guide when Zariah first wrote the alphabet. The same hand she held tight walking her into kindergarten. The same hand she gripped in the hospital when Zariah's uncle passed. Now it was the hand of a girl Harvard couldn't ignore. "Do you remember," her mother said softly, "when you brought home your first debate ribbon from that district meet and you said you weren't good enough for college tournaments yet?" Zariah smiled at the memory. "I remember," she nodded. "I also remember you making me rewrite my opening argument 5 times in one night. I was tired," her mother chuckled, "but you were hungry. I saw it in you even when you didn't." Zariah looked back at the letter, then toward the empty sidewalk in front of their house. A neighbor across the street watered a potted plant. Kids rode past on bicycles. A dog barked somewhere 2 blocks down. This was home. Not polished, not loud, not built for legacy, but it had raised her. This porch. That cracked mailbox. The woman sitting beside her. She picked her glass back up, took a long sip of iced tea, and exhaled. "I didn't think it would end like this," she said. "It's not ending, baby," her mom corrected. "It's just beginning." They sat in silence for a while, letting the evening pass over them. No camera crews, no tournament lights, just the soft creak of the porch boards and the warmth of victory that didn't need an audience. Because this moment was never for the world. It was for the girl who once cried over her first failing grade, for the girl who felt out of place walking through Harvard's archway, for the girl who was told she didn't belong until she made belonging irrelevant, and for the woman who never let go of her daughter's hand, even when the world did. Inside the envelope, tucked behind the acceptance letter, was a smaller card. On it was a single line handwritten in black ink. History isn't always written by the loudest voice. Sometimes it's written by the most honest one. Zariah read it, reread it, then folded the card back into its envelope. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A text from a former debate competitor. Saw the news. You're a legend, Cole. She didn't reply. Not yet. She wanted this moment to stay untouched. Later, there would be applications, travel plans, orientation schedules, more speeches. But now, there was just the quiet, and her iced tea, and a mother beside her with eyes closed, resting for the first time in what felt like years. Zariah leaned her head back, let the last light of the day wash over her face. The world hadn't given her a welcome, so she wrote her own invitation, and Harvard finally answered. But this time not with resistance, with respect. She came from a place where talent wasn't scouted, where brilliance wasn't expected, and yet, here she was. Proof that you don't need permission to matter, just truth, and the courage to say it out loud. The story of Zariah Cole is not just about winning a debate. It's about finding your voice in a place that never expected to hear it. It's about holding on when everything around you says, let go. And most of all, it's about a quiet kind of strength, the kind that grows in silence and one day stands tall enough for the world to see. Zariah reminded us that you don't have to come from power to speak with power, that you don't need a title to be worthy of respect, and that sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who had to fight just to enter it. Maybe you've felt that before, like you didn't belong somewhere, like the room wasn't built for you. Maybe you've walked in silence with dreams no one else could see. If you've ever carried that feeling, you're not alone. Zariah's story is for you. So let us ask you, what gave you strength when the world was quiet? Who believed in you when no one else did? We'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, so together we can keep sharing stories that remind us courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, keep going. Thank you for being here and for listening.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.